When former President Donald Trump made a surprise announcement in early 2020 about brokering a back-channel ceasefire between India and Pakistan, the world media was fixated on the idea of peace in South Asia. But what no one saw coming was how this truce, seemingly about regional stability, was deeply tied to something far more transactional, a hidden U.S.-Pakistan trade deal, orchestrated not in conference halls, but in private jets, military briefings, and late-night calls that never made the headlines. The story begins in February 2019, when the Pulwama attack rocked India and raised tensions to a boiling point with Pakistan. Fighter jets were scrambled, borders braced for war, and both nuclear nations teetered on the edge of catastrophe. While global leaders urged calm, Trump remained publicly neutral, tweeting occasionally about monitoring the situation, but behind the scenes, he was building a plan. Sources now confirm that just days after India retaliated with the Balakot airstrikes, Trump ordered his then Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and a covert team from the CIA and National Security Council to initiate secret dialogues with both Islamabad and New Delhi. The objective? Prevent all-out war, but with conditions. At the heart of Trump's playbook was Pakistan's growing desperation for economic relief. The country was drowning in debt, facing IMF pressure, and suffering from US-imposed military aid cuts. Trump saw this as leverage. And so, he offered an unpublicized deal to Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan. The US would open talks on a multi-billion-dollar trade agreement, giving Pakistan access to American technology, pharmaceuticals, and textile markets, if and only if Pakistan ensured militant silence on the line of control and got the Pakistani army to guarantee a long-term ceasefire with India. This wasn't just about peace. It was a business deal cloaked in diplomacy. By mid-2020, the COVID-19 pandemic gave cover to a flurry of secret digital negotiations. Zoom calls between Pakistani commerce officials and US trade envoys were encrypted and labeled as strategic pandemic coordination. But what was actually being discussed was a complex package: reduced tariffs on Pakistani textiles, access to American medical exports, and future infrastructure investment via US-backed companies. In return, Pakistan would pull back support to insurgent groups in Kashmir, engage in coordinated de-escalation on the LOC, and allow US oversight, via satellite and drone technology, to monitor ceasefire compliance. Meanwhile, India remained unaware of the full extent of Trump's dealings with Pakistan. Narendra Modi's government was briefed on the ceasefire intentions but believed they stemmed from mutual fatigue and economic necessity, not US incentives. What New Delhi didn't know was that Trump's leverage with Pakistan had come at a price: partial silence on human rights concerns in Kashmir and a diplomatic wink during UN meetings. By early 2021, ceasefire statements were exchanged between Indian and Pakistani military commands. Mainstream media hailed it as a breakthrough. What they didn't report was that, just days before the public announcement, a closed-door agreement was signed in Abu Dhabi between US and Pakistani envoys under Emirati supervision, confirming the first phase of trade concessions and US investment guarantees. But the truth doesn't stay hidden forever. A year later, a leaked cache of diplomatic cables, allegedly part of a failed ransomware attack on the Pakistani Ministry of Commerce, revealed code-named files like Project Falcon Trade, Truce Bridge, and most shockingly, Deal 45C, Ceasefire Dividend. These documents outlined precise timelines linking de-escalation acts to US trade milestones. One memo read, "If LOC violations remain under 2/month through Q1, Phase 2 tariff reductions will initiate by June 10th. Surveillance data via Pentagon satellites to validate compliance." The leak caused chaos in both countries' parliaments, but the US denied any formal linkage. Trump's post-presidency office issued a vague statement calling it bold peace entrepreneurship, neither confirming nor denying involvement. Former Pakistani insiders, however, began to speak under anonymity. One ex-defense official claimed, "We weren't just negotiating peace. We were selling it. Trump gave us a lifeline, but he knew exactly what he was buying: regional calm in exchange for US economic access." The full picture emerged slowly. From ceasefire to commerce, Trump had flipped South Asia's most dangerous standoff into a transactional chess move. It was never just about stopping bullets. It was about opening ports, pipelines, and bank accounts. But every deal has a cost. As Pakistan grew more dependent on US exports and American oversight, voices within its military and intelligence circles began to resist. In mid-2022, reports surfaced of internal rifts in the ISI, with hardliners accusing leadership of selling national sovereignty in exchange for short-term trade gains. Tensions flared again on the LOC, albeit briefly. But the U.S. responded quickly, cutting off select trade privileges for a 6-week period until Pakistan restored internal discipline. The message was clear: peace was now a contract. And Trump, even out of office, he used the truce as proof of his deal-making genius during rallies. "I stopped a war without firing a shot," he boasted in Ohio. "I brought peace to South Asia and brought jobs back to America. That's called winning." But not everyone agreed. Analysts warned that peace built on profit can collapse faster than it forms. Still, for the moment, guns stayed silent and goods kept moving. And somewhere in Washington, a framed satellite image of the quiet line of control hung behind a closed door, with a label underneath: Ceasefire, brokered by commerce, engineered by Trump. But while the silence of guns was celebrated on the surface, the undercurrents of the deal began to stir unrest in unexpected quarters. Inside Pakistan's parliament, whispers grew louder. Nationalist leaders began questioning how much autonomy had been traded away. One fiery senator from Balochistan stood up during a closed-door session and declared, "We did not sign up to be a commercial colony of the West. What we've done is surrender our soul for a few shipping containers and a silent border." In India, the realization came late. A classified briefing prepared for Prime Minister Modi by raw intelligence detailed snippets of intercepted American-Pakistani communications. The conclusion: while India had de-escalated under the belief of mutual strategic exhaustion, Pakistan had been incentivized to maintain peace, not by its own internal calculus, but by American trade promises. Modi was furious. According to a senior aide, he slammed his fist on the table and said, "We gave up leverage thinking they wanted peace. But they were being paid to act peaceful." In retaliation, India quietly stalled several trade talks with the U.S., delayed military procurement deals, and increased back-channel support to Baloch separatist factions as a form of asymmetric pressure on Islamabad. By the end of 2022, Washington found itself in an increasingly delicate balancing act. The Biden administration, having inherited Trump's covert deal, now had to maintain the fragile truce while addressing India's growing resentment. A new proposal was floated, one that would grant India deeper access to U.S. intelligence sharing networks in the Indo-Pacific in exchange for softening its stance on the ceasefire narrative. But this only further complicated the equation. For Pakistan, the more the U.S. leaned toward India to placate its concerns, the more fragile the truce became. There were flare-ups again: a drone shot down in Kashmir, mysterious shelling at midnight that both sides denied responsibility for, and the death of an Indian soldier under suspicious circumstances. Yet even then, neither nation moved to full-scale escalation. Why? Because the commercial channels born of the ceasefire had grown too valuable. Pakistani textile exports had doubled in a year. American tech firms had begun quietly testing pilot programs in Lahore and Karachi. A trade corridor through Gwadar was being co-financed by U.S. logistics firms that once avoided the region entirely. And amidst all this, a new threat emerged, not from India or Pakistan, but from China. Beijing, observing the U.S.-Pakistan thaw with alarm, ramped up its activity in the region. The China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, CPEC, once Pakistan's most prized economic lifeline, now faced internal resistance as Pakistani industries began shifting preference toward U.S. partners who brought not just capital, but influence. Chinese officials, once celebrated in Islamabad, began facing cold receptions. A top Chinese diplomat complained anonymously to Global Times, saying, "Pakistan is drifting. America gave them a deal with conditions, and now they think they can play both sides." So China responded in kind. In the winter of 2023, reports emerged of advanced Chinese radar systems being discreetly installed near the line of control, ostensibly for weather tracking. But Indian satellites saw otherwise. A secret Indian defense white paper labeled it "Early Warning for Ceasefire Collapse." Tensions climbed again. Meanwhile, inside the Pentagon, a new task force was created. Dubbed Operation Silent Silk, its goal was to ensure that the U.S.-Pakistan trade framework survived no matter who held political office in either country. The operation included economic advisors, military liaisons, cybersecurity experts, and even social media analysts tasked with monitoring sentiment in South Asia. But the mission wasn't just defensive. The U.S. had bigger plans. An exclusive Washington briefing laid out a bold vision: leverage the Indo-Pak truce to open South Asia for American capital. Turn conflict zones into commerce zones. If China built the roads, we'll build the cash flow. And Trump, though no longer in the White House, he continued to boast about the legacy of his behind-the-scenes deal-making. In a 2024 Fox News interview, he smirked and said, "You know what the best kind of war is? The kind you turn into a mall." But in Islamabad, one old general wasn't smiling. Retired General Saeed Ghul, who had opposed the U.S. pact from the beginning, sat with a journalist from Al Jazeera and spoke bluntly, "Trump may have bought silence, but he didn't buy loyalty. The day that money dries, or the day Pakistan sees that America favors Delhi again, that's the day this ceasefire turns into ashes." The journalist asked, "Are you saying the peace is fake?" The general replied, "No. It's real. But it's rented." And as the monsoon rain swept across Kashmir, washing away the shallow trenches that once separated enemy soldiers, one couldn't help but wonder, when the trade slows, when the dollars stop flowing, will the silence last? The answer, buried deep in war rooms and boardrooms alike, still remains uncertain. But one thing is clear, Trump's ceasefire wasn't just history. It was a business model. And business, for now, is booming. By early 2025, the world had started to catch on. A leaked briefing from NATO's South Asia desk revealed a startling phrase, Ceasefire Dependency Index. It was a new metric, an unofficial barometer of how long peace could hold between India and Pakistan based on economic variables, not military movements. The key inputs: trade volume with the U.S., Pakistani textile exports, fuel transit through Afghanistan, and American investment inflows into Lahore's emerging tech hubs. In other words, the formula for peace had shifted from soldiers and strategy to shipping routes and spreadsheet models. But peace built on profit isn't immune to sabotage. On February 14, 2025, the anniversary of the Pulwama attack, a sudden explosion rocked the outskirts of Srinagar. A convoy of Indian military vehicles was hit by a coordinated IED blast, killing 7 soldiers. The Indian media erupted. Within hours, hashtags like #KashmirBetrayed and #CeasefireLie were trending nationwide. The Indian government, now under Prime Minister Anika Rao, a hardliner with little patience for behind-the-scenes diplomacy, issued a midnight ultimatum to Pakistan: cooperate with the investigation or face consequences. Pakistan's leadership, now a fragile coalition headed by technocrats with U.S. backing, denied involvement and offered joint inquiries. But inside GHQ Rawalpindi, military hawks were livid. They saw Rao's statement as a provocation designed to humiliate Islamabad on the world stage. What no one expected was how quickly the economic machine would respond. Within 48 hours, the U.S. Department of Commerce suspended $1.2 billion in textile orders from Pakistan, citing regional instability. The Pakistani rupee nosedived. The Karachi Stock Exchange halted trading twice in one day. In Washington, an emergency meeting was convened at the White House Situation Room, chaired not by military generals, but by trade and cybersecurity advisors. This wasn't a war anymore. It was a market correction. And in the background, Trump re-entered the stage, not as a politician, but as a kingmaker. Having just launched his new media platform, Patriot Sphere, he published a message that went instantly viral. "Told you they needed me. I kept India and Pakistan from war. Biden sold the blueprint. Watch it crumble." The post was shared over 20 million times in a day. But while the online world debated Trump's claim, something far more dangerous was unfolding on the ground. A rogue unit of Pakistani border guards, unofficially tied to the Haqqani network, was caught on drone footage attempting to breach the LOC under the cover of night. Indian snipers returned fire. No casualties were reported, but the footage was leaked to international media within hours. A CNN broadcast titled "Return to the Brink" aired across the globe. Inside Langley, CIA analysts noticed an anomaly. Encrypted communications between certain ISI operatives and Chinese cyber nodes suggested that the Pulwama-style attack and the LOC breach may have been orchestrated, not by mainstream Pakistani forces, but by third-party actors, possibly financed by elements within China's intelligence apparatus. The motive: collapse the U.S.-Pakistan economic axis before it could solidify. If true, it was a masterstroke. Trigger a localized incident, ignite nationalist fury, disrupt trade flow, and force the U.S. to choose between two regional partners. Washington was in a bind. A decision had to be made. So they chose to escalate trade pressure once more, but not in the usual way. This time, they weaponized digital finance. Through a quiet but coordinated action, US-based fintech firms froze the clearing systems used by Pakistani e-commerce startups, effectively halting tens of millions in daily transactions. The move wasn't announced publicly, but its effects were immediate. Youth-led protests erupted in Islamabad and Karachi, chanting, "Where is our sovereignty?" and "We are not your market puppets." Meanwhile, in India, Prime Minister Rao signed a new defense pact with Japan and Australia, bypassing Washington entirely. The message was clear: India was done waiting for American balance games. It was forging its own path now, with or without U.S. mediation. The truce, as it had been shaped in 2020, was beginning to fracture. But before war could return, something unexpected happened. On March 3, 2025, an anonymous whistleblower posted a series of confidential U.S.-Pakistan trade negotiation transcripts on the dark web. The files revealed the full extent of Trump's original plan, codename Operation Dividend. The files included audio recordings, satellite schedules, even internal memos marked strictly for Oval Office. One quote from Trump's own voice cracked through the digital silence. "It's not just peace I'm buying. It's obedience. They'll never shoot if they're getting paid." The fallout was immediate and seismic. Protests exploded not just in Pakistan, but in Washington, D.C. and New York. Civil liberty groups, South Asian diaspora leaders, and even Trump's former allies condemned the cynical commodification of regional peace. But the most chilling reaction came from within India's RAW. An unnamed senior official, speaking to The Hindu, said, "We always knew there was a cost to peace. What we didn't know was that the invoice had Trump's signature." The ceasefire still technically held. No major troop movements. No aerial strikes. No declarations of war. But the trust shattered. And now, with elections looming again in the U.S., and the world watching whether the Trump doctrine of peace for profit would make a comeback or be buried in scandal, a new question emerged across foreign policy circles. What happens when the business of peace becomes more fragile than the threat of war itself? In the spring of 2025, a quiet summit took place, not in Washington, Islamabad, or New Delhi, but in a neutral hall in Geneva. There were no cameras, no press briefings. Just 4 people at a round table: a senior U.S. trade envoy, an Indian intelligence diplomat, a Pakistani military strategist, and a mediator from the United Nations. The goal wasn't to sign a new ceasefire. It was to salvage what remained of the old one, and to rewrite the terms of peace, this time without the illusion of silence for sale. Each party arrived with a different motive. India wanted guarantees, no more covert Pakistan deals behind its back. Pakistan wanted dignity, an end to economic strong-arming and public humiliation. The U.S. wanted continuity, stable trade routes, silence in South Asia, and a firewall against Chinese expansion. The meeting ran 14 hours straight. And in the end, a new pact was drafted, not a military accord, not a trade agreement, but a regional transparency compact. It bound all 3 powers to disclose any economic or strategic arrangements that could affect balance in South Asia. Satellite monitoring would be conducted not just by the U.S., but by an independent body of neutral observers. Financial pipelines would now be audited jointly, and all back-channel diplomacy would be recorded, archived, and made available to both India and Pakistan within 90 days of signing. The agreement was code-named Project Horizon. The goal: peace through exposure, not secrecy. The world never heard of this meeting, but its effects were felt. Kashmir remained tense, but stable. LOC violations dropped to near zero for the first time in decades. American firms continued their operations in Pakistan, but now under local joint ventures. India resumed trade negotiations with the U.S., this time with direct transparency clauses. China, observing the shift, softened its rhetoric and rechanneled investment through multilateral platforms. And Donald Trump? He watched from Mar-a-Lago as news leaked that his original Operation Dividend had been quietly declassified and archived, labeled as an experimental diplomacy project with volatile ethical implications. He issued one final statement on his social media platform. "They said peace wasn't for sale. I proved it could be leased." Then he walked off the stage. Not with a bang, but with a smirk. And so, the region that once stood on the brink of nuclear war now operated under a new kind of deterrent: exposure. The fear of conflict remained, but so did the fear of headlines, hacked documents, whistleblowers, and the collapse of global perception. In the end, it wasn't peace deals or military might that preserved the quiet. It was the knowledge that every move was now being watched, not just by governments, but by history itself. The ceasefire endured. Not because it was perfect, but because too many had too much to lose if it broke again. And that was the real cost of peace. Not bullets, not borders, but business and the truth behind it. The final legacy of a president who didn't stop a war. He bought time instead.